Okay, I want you to picture this. Imagine you're walking down these massive, ancient stone corridors. It's dead quiet. The only light is coming from flickering candles, casting these huge, long shadows against the walls. And they lead you right up to a set of heavy, iron-bound wooden doors. Behind those doors, that is the inner sanctum of the Vatican Apostolic Archive. For centuries, it was known simply, and let's be honest, pretty ominously, as the Vatican Secret Archives. This is a place that has literally fueled the imaginations of writers and conspiracy theorists for generations. We're talking about millions of documents spanning over 1,000 years of human history, all securely locked away. But today, we're going to dive into this explainer by focusing on one specific, absolutely mind-blowing story hidden deep within those walls. So you might be wondering, what actually ranks as the Vatican's most explosive secret, right? I mean, hidden among all the everyday administrative paperwork, the papal decrees, and these intricately coded letters from ancient royalty, there is one document that completely shatters our understanding of the Middle Ages. And the crazy thing is, this isn't some historical fiction, it's a real-life historical thriller. It's packed with intense papal politics, horrifying accusations of heresy, and the sudden, brutal destruction of history's most legendary warrior monks. I am talking, of course, about the lost trial of the Knights Templar. Now, to really wrap our heads around the magnitude of this historical mystery, we first need to look at exactly who the victims were here, just to contextualize their unbelievable historical power. Officially, they went by a pretty long name, the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, but you and I know them best as the Knights Templar. You know the image, knights in heavy chainmail, proudly wearing those iconic white tunics with that stark red cross. Their rise to power was just staggering. Back in the 12th century, they actually had a very humble, specific mission. They were just a monastic military order dedicated to protecting Christian pilgrims heading to Jerusalem. But wow, did that change quickly. As we move into the 13th and 14th centuries, through incredibly clever logistics, massive donations, and strategic land grabs, their military might just exploded. But here's the real kicker. They basically invented modern international banking. They accumulated vast, unimaginable wealth. They had heavily armed fortresses everywhere. And perhaps most importantly, they answered to absolutely no one on Earth. Well, except the Pope himself. But, as history constantly reminds us, getting your hands on that much unfettered power and gold, well, it usually paints a massive target on your back. And that brings us to the murder in our historical true crime story. And we've got a very clear primary suspect. King Philip IV of France. Now, King Philip had a huge problem. He was deeply, desperately in debt to the Templars. The guy needed cash, and he needed it yesterday. The Templars had all the wealth he craved, and they were sitting right there in his own backyard. But how on earth do you take down a globally powerful, heavily armed religious order that only answers to the Pope? Simple. You execute a totally ruthless, highly coordinated surprise attack. And here's where it gets really fascinating. Because it takes a famous modern superstition and anchors it to this brutal true historical sweep. When we hear Friday the 13th today, we immediately think of bad luck, right? Or cheesy horror movies. But that notorious reputation was actually cemented on Friday, October 13th, 1307. On that exact morning, King Philip launched a perfectly timed raid. In a single day, armed men burst into castles all over the country to simultaneously arrest every single Templar in France. It was a stunning, overnight decapitation of one of the most powerful organizations on the planet. Of course, King Philip couldn't exactly go to the public and say, hey, I'm arresting these holy warrior monks because I maxed out my credit cards. He needed a justification that would absolutely horrify the public and force the church's hand. So he manufactured this wild list of charges. We're talking heresy, spitting on the cross, literal devil worship, and unspeakable obscenities during their secret initiation rituals. And to make absolutely sure these ridiculous charges stuck, the Templars were handed over to the French Inquisition for brutal torture. Under that kind of extreme agony, yeah, many Templars did what literally anyone would do. They confessed to whatever they were told to say. So this perfectly sets up the ultimate clash of motives. On one side, you have King Philip IV, driven purely by desperation and crippling debt, willing to use absolute brutality to get his hands on their assets. And on the other side stands Pope Clement V, the head of the Catholic Church. Because the Templars were a religious order, the final say on whether they were guilty of these horrific crimes or totally innocent, rested entirely with the Pope. It was a massive showdown, a desperate secular king demanding their gold versus a religious authority buckling under intense political pressure. Now, here's where our narrative takes a massive U-turn. For hundreds of years, literally centuries, historians looked back at this event and all agreed on one standard story. They falsely believed that Pope Clement V had just completely caved and entirely abandoned the Templars. The widely accepted history was that in 1312, the Pope officially dissolved the order and just let the French king burn their leaders at the stake. Basically, everyone thought the Pope sold them out to save his own skin. But here is the craziest part of all of this. That accepted narrative, the one taught for generations, it was completely wrong. For over 700 years, the real truth, the actual documented facts of what went down between the Pope and the Templars was locked away, hidden deep inside the Vatican vaults. 7 centuries of history were written incorrectly, all because the evidence was buried in the dark. But hey, history is never really settled as long as there are archives left to dig through, right? Fast forward to the year 2001. A brilliant paleographer named Barbara Frail is working deep inside the Vatican Apostolic Archive. She's searching through these endless ancient files and she makes an absolutely stunning discovery. She finds a document that we now call the Chinon parchment. And this wasn't just some random piece of paper. This weathered parchment with its faded Latin script and original papal wax seal was the actual official transcript of an interrogation. And not just any interrogation. This was the record of the Templar leaders being questioned in 1308 by Pope Clement's own personal cardinals. And this document revealed a twist no one saw coming. It explicitly states that the Pope had secretly absolved the Templars of heresy. Actually, let that sink in for a second. He absolved them. Pope Clement V wasn't just some passive bystander who got bullied. He knew full well that all those bizarre confessions about devil worship and spitting on crosses were completely fabricated. He knew the French king had tortured those confessions out of them. Through this secret interrogation, the Pope actively tried to save the Templars, and he legally found them innocent of heresy. But as we all know, knowing the truth and actually having the power to act on it are two very different things, especially back in the 14th century. The real tragic irony here is that even though Pope Clement knew they were innocent, and even though he secretly absolved the order, King Philip's political leverage was just too overwhelming. The Pope was essentially backed into a corner. To keep the peace and protect the wider Catholic Church from this desperate, heavily armed king, Pope Clement V was forced to suppress the Chinon parchment. He quietly shoved the truth deep into the archives and officially dissolved the Knights Templar anyway. Which brings us to our final takeaway. When Barbara Frail rediscovered the Chinon parchment, it didn't just add a tiny footnote to a textbook. It literally rewrote history. It proved once and for all that the actual, documented reality hidden inside those Vatican archives is often way more fascinating than any wild conspiracy fiction you could ever dream up. It really makes you realize how fragile our understanding of the past can be. So I'll leave you with this to think about. If something this massive was hidden for 700 years, what other lost secrets do you think are still locked away, just gathering dust in the deep, dark vaults of the Vatican?